Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, a podcast that aims to provide valuable information to young saxophonists and music students in a digestible amount of time. I'm Owen Robinson, and today I will be interviewing Jeffrey Allardyce, professor of saxophone at the University of Utah. Dr. Allardyce, it's great to have you on the show today.
Hey, Owen, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, as a recent doctoral graduate, would you be willing to share some of your experiences between your last year of school and being hired at the University of Utah?
Yeah, sure. Um, when I think about this past year, it has been a year of transitions, and there have been two times where I've moved so far away from home. And the first being when I went to Eastman for my master's, and now moving here, more or less across the country to Utah and Salt Lake City. And I can still vividly remember when I was, finishing up my 9 or 10 hour drive to Rochester and coming over this hill and seeing the city skyline of Rochester and knowing that that would be my new home for 2 years. And, COVID kind of mucked up a little bit of that, but, I was still able to be there in person, which was great. And it was a similar thing this past year when I moved out here mid-July, coming down I-80 West through the canyon. And once we got down the mouth of the canyon, just having to open up and seeing the Salt Lake Valley, it was my heart sank and my heart fluttered at the same time in both of those instances. And now it feels like home, and I'm really, really grateful for that. But when push comes to shove, actually having to move for where that job opens up can be pretty stressful when you actually get to that point. Because we all know when we're going through school that we'll have to make that sacrifice to move where the opportunity is, for better or worse. But I will say, I'm really, really grateful to have ended up here with all the opportunities here, both at the university and outside of the university. So that's been a really great experience. As far as moving from a student to a more active teaching role, so I did teach adjunct throughout my DMA, but one thing that I would encourage students at all levels to keep in the back of their mind is that they are going to need to have really strong fundamentals and be able to eloquently discuss those fundamentals. At least in my experience and with those that I've talked with, as we get into grad school at the master's level and especially in the doctoral level, the level of playing and the kinds of discussions that we have continually get more niche, more specific, more advanced. And that is the point of those years in our schooling, because that is when we really refine our craft. But sometimes it can get lost in that also, that we're going to have to jump back out into the workforce and work with students of all playing abilities. And one thing that I'm really happy with regarding my music ed degree is that in my teaching, I really try to pre-plan or at least think about if students are to ask me why or how. And a lot of times in schooling, you'll be told to play it a certain way and you'll accept that and you'll understand why and you'll just do it that way rather than asking why or how. Or there'll be something like, oh, your timbre changed too much. Can you make this darker? Can you make this brighter? Your articulation sounds heavy. Can you lighten that up? And usually once you get more advanced, you know how to do that, like physically and mechanically. And there have been so many times this year, which has really helped refine my teaching, where I've had a student ask me, why do you want me to do it that way? What if I wanted to do it this way? Um, how do I do that? And being able to have a response rather than figure it out has been such a great refinement tool to my pedagogy and my teaching that I've really, really appreciated.
That's awesome. That's a really great answer. I still remember it was last year when you and I were working on slap tonguing, and I had
Oh
kind of
yeah.
a breakthrough with my sustained slap tongue, where I could always get the slap sound, but I couldn't get the sustained pitch afterward without
Mhm.
like some kind of a scoop. And then it kind of did the way you explained um, how you did it, you know, because I think my trouble there was like, does the embouchure move at all? Am I supposed to stay completely still, or does it voicing change? Does the tongue position change? And like, I think it was a combination of all of that we were able to work through in a couple lessons. And
Mhm.
yeah, now that really, yeah, your ability to actually kind of work through the physicality of what was going on really made the difference in terms of something
Mhm.
that I'd been sort of trying to wrap my head around for years.
Yeah. And every student is a little bit different, which is, the challenge, but also the fun of it. Um, but yeah, you always try and be on your toes and have concrete things that you can talk about and steps that you can go through to try and troubleshoot. Um, and one thing that I've really enjoyed this year is that I've been able to do a lot of like high school and middle school outreach. And that has really, really helped refine my ability to troubleshoot and problem solve. Um, because, with students at the university, you'll see them once a week. So you see them about 14 or 15 hours one-on-one per semester. And there's only so much that you can do. And that has really shown its face this year and this past semester. Because, again, I've taught adjunct before, but being able to see the growth of students each week and work with them on a one-on-one level, it has really shown me what I can do in an hour and how much I need to like troubleshoot, problem solve, help them work through it, but also work with them in how they practice. Kind of get into more of like the metacognition of thinking about their thinking, um, how they tackle a practice session, what they practice, how they practice it, and really trying to instill that in them as well. Because, I'm only with them 1% of the week. Um, so it's really up to them and trying to work through that process. And, I was on a hike with Laura Grantier a couple weeks ago, the clarinet professor here, and we talked a lot about how process is really important, whether it's the process of what goes on behind the scenes and the administrative things that we do that the students may or may not ever realize, um, the process of, you know, how to work through a new piece, but really the process of practicing too, um, because we need to instill that work ethic since we just really don't have a lot of time with our students, even though it feels like we do because we see them every week, but really it's not that much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, is something, as we've both worked for a long time with Joe Luloff, that he does really well is
Hmm.
um, you know, teaching students how to teach themselves is kind of
Hmm.
the ultimate goal of really great teachers. And I think he exemplifies that, you know. Um, I think that, it's great to pass things on to students and see their improvement, but, I think you hit the nail on the head there with we want to leave students with a work ethic and an ability to learn on their own.
Hmm. Yeah, and throughout this year, I've really tried to have open conversations with students, trying to see what they want out of their music, what their ideas are, where we agree, where we diverge, and actually being able to talk about that. And it kind of goes back to the why and the how, um, because I will have a certain way of playing a piece, let's say the Glazunov, where I want it to be phrased X way. And I worked on that piece with a few students, and some of them would phrase a little bit differently, breathe in different spots. And I would say, well, why don't we try it this way? And they would say, why? And it reminds me because you mentioned Professor Luloff. I think it was the second year of my DMA or the third, but I think the second. I was moderately prepared for a lesson. Um, and I was talking with him about, how to phrase a certain section. And I said, well, how would you do it? And he said, no, no, no. This is not time for, Jeff Allardyce to be the nice guy and do it the way that I want to do it. Like, you need to decide how you want to do it, and you need to sell me on it. You're a doctoral student. Like, and it was definitely, it has stuck with me. And it was a little bit of a humbling moment because I was, I totally see where he was coming from with that. But again, it's kind of going into that higher level of playing where if you're going to tell a student, well, maybe not tell, but encourage them to play in a certain way, you need to know why. Whether or not it has to do with something physical, like how much breath you have, or if there's more of a musical component to it,
Mhm.
like the harmony or the phrase or how the melody plays out, voice leading, things like that. Um, but it has been really great to have students challenge me in that way to say, why? Why do you want me to do it this way? Or, I'm not sure I can do that right now, but how would you recommend I practice to be able to do it that way? So that's been a very rewarding aspect of this year too.
That's awesome. Yeah, you mentioning just like, the minutia of, phrasing, where to breathe, where not
Hmm.
to breathe, and having a reason, you know. So I think that's something throughout undergrad I was able to like refine more and more, something that, say a high school student maybe isn't thinking about very much or at all, you know.
Hmm.
If you ask, a 17-year-old saxophone player, why are you breathing there? It might just be, I don't know, I ran out of air. And I ran it probably like I
Yep.
ran out of air, I don't know. And it's like,
Yep.
well, you interrupted the phrase or you breathed on a cadence or whatever, they
Hmm.
might be kind of aware of what that means, but then it's like, it was nice throughout undergrad, once I got more of those theory classes under my belt, more private lessons
Hmm.
under my belt, I started to notice more and more things about, I was talking earlier today about how, sometimes uh, I would crescendo in awkward places within a phrase just instinctively. And Professor Luloff finally pointed that out at one point where he's like, it sounds like you're inflating a balloon or something. It's like you're
Yep.
you're ballooning your sound here
I had
and
the
it
same
doesn't
thing.
make sense. Why are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I felt like I was running out of energy. He's like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, exactly. You didn't like, decide where you
Mhm.
wanted this phrase to go. So you're just kind of like, and I listened back to my Glazunov recording from high school, and I was like, oh my gosh, like I do that. Like there are just like
Yeah.
these random points where I like grow the sound when it's like I didn't necessarily like maybe hear it that way. There's knowing how to explain it, which I think we were kind of getting at, and then there's also the ability to like quickly diagnose something like that in a student too.
Hmm.
You know, like that's something that Luloff is great at, is like he just every few lessons he'll hear something and be like, ah, aha, I have it.
Yeah.
You do this. You do. I know why it
Yeah.
sounds weird there. You do this. And
I
he's
had a
been
couple of
listening
those.
intently enough where he has that kind of
Hmm.
aha moment. I guess that's kind of a good segue into the next question, which is, aside from your professors, who are some of your biggest influences as a saxophonist?
The first thing that comes to mind is the H2 quartet. Um, when I was just finishing up eighth grade and through high school, I studied with Jonathan Nickel, who's the tenor saxophonist in H2, because at that time he was still at Grand Valley State University in West Michigan, like 20 or 30 minutes away from where I grew up. Um, and those first two CDs that they came out with, I listened to probably over 100 times, just because, as a young saxophonist, it was so incredibly inspiring to hear their musicianship, hear their, playing ability, their saxophone ability. And as a young student, that was, foundational and fundamental to my concept of tone, ensembleship within chamber music playing. Um, and yeah, it was it was so funny because I was listening to Fish Off this weekend, and one of the groups I was listening to played the Florio, and at the end of their performance, the H2's Generations CD was so ingrained in my head that I could hear the next piece on the CD after Florio finished up in the recording that I was watching at Fish Off. And I was like, oh, this is so weird. That is just like so ingrained in my brain. Um, and yeah, it really takes me back because that was when I lived in Granville, southwestern Grand Rapids, and now my family moved up to Sparta, north of Grand Rapids. But I can just picture myself, putting the CD in the CD player and having it come out of the speakers in the ceiling in the den of my old house. And I was such a nerd. I would like write in the timestamp of when like the beautiful arrivals would happen in each piece. And um, but yeah, it was just so foundational. Or is that, I don't even know if that's a word, but fundamental um, to my early conceptions of saxophone. And it's been so rewarding to continue with those relationships and have them change a little bit now that it's been, hate to say it, but 15 years. Um, and, being able to go to the Great Plains Saxophone Workshop, going to the Cortona sessions in Cortona, Italy was just such a treat and a privilege in my undergrad to be able to go to that festival twice and then piggyback off that and go to the World Saxophone Congress in France and Croatia. Those were just amazing experiences. Um, but yeah, that group and just being able to work with them and know them over this past decade and more has been such a treat. And I mean, and now you study with Jeff Dybel, so
Yeah,
we're fully within that family tree.
yeah, I know. It's like I haven't gotten to work with him quite as much as I'd like to yet, given like right
Mm,
now I'm doing a jazz studies degree.
mhm.
But I've gotten to take, kind of on and off lessons, and I got to hear H2 play with the wind orchestra at Florida State pretty
Right.
recently. I didn't get to go to the actual concert because the jazz orchestra was on tour, but I was able to sit in on rehearsal and listen. Um, and it's always so great to hear them. I know, I I don't know, how far I would have pursued collegiate saxophone if it weren't for Central Michigan Saxophone Day and
Mm,
Jeff Leffert and Jonathan Nickel. They did their H24 duo. They did a recital
right.
program. And um, the senior quartet at the time, I don't remember the name of this group, but they played one of Jeff Leffert's pieces, Worthless. That like, and hearing Dr. Leffert talk about the piece, how it was inspired by, Ernest Becker's book, The Denial of Death, I think.
Mm,
And like, there was this like kind of intersection of like music, philosophy, and psychology, which were like a lot of the things that I was interested in at the time.
mm,
Um, and you know, I just found it very inspiring that he was able to channel these, intellectual interests into
mhm,
his music. And I think that was one of the things that sort of reframed my idea of like what music was and like what it meant.
mhm,
Um, and Yeah, no, but definitely that was kind of a pivotal moment, I think, was that
mhm,
saxophone day.
mhm. Yeah, and I mean, I can still remember because why I got into saxophone. Um, because right at the end of eighth grade, John Nickel, who's at Central Michigan, he was the adjudicator and judge at State Jazz Festival, and I had a feature in one of the charts that we were doing, and he was also our clinician after we performed. And he came up to me and he pointed at me as he always does when he talks to people, and he said, "You should study with my son." Um, and it's that was the you know beginning of the end. Because ever since then, I've just been hooked. Um, and I always hold on to that because that is something that I don't want to lose as a teacher. Being active out in the field, doing outreach, getting out and adjudicating. Because I mean, I have a music ed degree, and I really, really thought about whether I would teach K through 12 or not. And after student teaching, I almost didn't continue. Um, just trying to think about what path I wanted, but yeah, just being that person for today's young people is something that really inspires me and keeps me going, because it's such a fun age group to work with.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've gotten the opportunity to teach some high school students this year in the Tallahassee area. And I think, it's one thing with the performance undergrad versus the
Mm,
music education undergrad, I think has definitely left some gaps or holes in
mm,
my teaching ability. So, of course, I mean, I think the best way to learn to teach is to do it. My
mhm,
dad always says he's a was an English professor for 16 years. He says teaching is the highest form of learning. Um,
Yes.
and I agree completely, even from the little teaching that I have done. But going through a performance undergrad at somewhere like, Michigan State, where you're
Mhm.
surrounded and kind of spoiled by these,
Yeah.
really high level players, many of whom are much much better than, myself, and when you go to teach people who truly are beginners and really don't have any idea what they're doing yet, uh it's an adjustment for sure.
Hmm.
It's like, it tests, I think, your patience, your ability to
Yeah.
calibrate to, people's needs. You have to be empathetic, and at times when it's hard to, because
Mhm.
I'll notice with high school students, there's that they don't really understand how to practice and also
Mhm.
don't have the motivation a lot of times. And and I have to look back to like maybe eighth grade me or freshman in high school me, where that kind of was the case, probably.
Mhm.
Where, I think I was fortunate to start playing the piano when I was 7 and take regular music lessons pretty much from then onward, on, a few different instruments.
Mhm.
I started on piano for a while. I thought I wanted to be a bass player, and then I picked up the saxophone, and I found that much easier. And I liked treble clef better than bass clef for whatever reason. And I don't know. And then I started taking saxophone lessons. But I think for the
Mhm.
first couple years, it was like, I don't think the motivation was there. I kind of did it when I wanted to. Um, and then, I think my sophomore, more so my junior year, is when I finally had that pivot point where I'm like, okay, I think I want to do this for real. This, like, let's
Mhm.
stop messing around, you
Mhm.
know, all your scales and all the keys played correctly. Stop procrastinating, learn real pieces. Don't just do
Mhm.
everything, start doing stuff on your own, start transcribing solos. And then it like I progressed very, very rapidly once I kind of decided, okay, this is not something that's just going to happen.
Mhm.
Um, but I think it's hard working with especially early high school because I don't think that they understand that part of it. They don't understand the importance of practice and the fact that it's a skill really like anything else.
Mhm. Yeah, I kind of want to latch on to, the one-on-one aspect that you were kind of talking about and how each student is so much of an individual. Um, it's been, again, I feel like I've said it a couple times, but like it's the big challenge of it, but it's also the big reward of what, especially applied teaching. Well, I mean, generally just saxophone teaching, period. But like, at the university level, being able to focus on each student's journey, what they want to get out of the degree, the difference between music ed and performance, and even the differences of what students' goals are within those degrees, as well as, the Bachelor of Arts, if they're, double majoring, but they still really love music. Um, so being able to kind of gauge and calibrate what you want to get out of those students and what they want to get out of it. And then, yeah, beginners, and because I do have some middle school students up in Park City, which is it's really fun. I mean, honestly, that was probably the the most, well, maybe not the most fun I had during student teaching, but maybe the most rewarding aspect I had student teaching was that um, spring of, let's see, 2019, I student taught at East Kentwood, and I was in charge of the clarinetists that switched over to saxophone. And being able to see the growth every single time I met with them was so fun. And middle school would be challenging to have as the gig and the main gig. Um, there's so many things that are, magical about that time in a person's life, but also, it poses its own challenges. But yeah, just, being able to drop in and teach lessons to that age group is so fun. Um, just because every single time they make progress, um, if they practice or if they don't practice, usually because you can pull something out of them within, the half hour or the hour that you're with them. Um, but yeah, beginners through advanced. Um, I think if you can just find what is enjoyable about that age range, it really makes it worthwhile no matter what age group you're with.
Yes, a wonderful, wonderful. Um, so the next question I wanted to ask um, is maybe something that's more, applicable to college teaching or maybe advanced high school. Do you find that your knowledge of music theory impacts your playing or your teaching? If so, in what
Yes.
ways?
Yeah, most definitely. Um, kind of going back to what we were talking about with phrasing, I think that really focusing on students' oral skills and their ability to build their ear really, really helps with their musicianship and their musicality. And whether that be, thinking of a long horizontal line versus more of a vertical view of a melody, seeing how pitches relate to one another, how chromaticism can be introduced to add tension and release. Like you were saying, thinking about cadences, how you can lead into them, how you can gracefully get out of them. Maybe that'll be a place where, you can snag a breath after a phrase, but you actually have more of a logical understanding as to why that works rather than just, oh, I thought it would, or oh, I thought it did. Um, Not to say that, building a student's ear is, second to having a theoretical understanding of why maybe it's a good place to breathe. Because I think that the ear can lead you through a lot of, a lot of beautiful music and I mean all styles of music, honestly. Um, and yeah, I think especially thinking of the the harmony, how you can affect your tone to bring that out, whether you want it to be brighter or darker, if there's a shift in harmony, how you can lead through a phrase, again, thinking of it more in a horizontal fashion, kind of tying in a little bit with Schenker and how he'll view the important pitches of a phrase that, you know, act within more of a hierarchy of what is being brought out in the line. I think that can still be used in today's music, although it's a very specific and niche study of music, generally from a very specific and niche time period and style. But I was able to take that aspect of, horizontal playing, really trying to connect between pitches, thinking of the longer line. I say often in lessons, aiming for the goalpost notes. So those really important notes that you're trying to lead into, how other aspects of the melody could be an embellishment of those. Um, and yeah, I would say that it shows its head most in how I try to phrase. Um, and when I was at Michigan State, I taught all 4 semesters of the oral skills sequence. And that has really affected how I teach as well, because I try to play in every single lesson just to be a tonal model for my students. And honestly, I think I probably have played in almost every lesson, if not every lesson. But I also sing in pretty much every lesson and really attaching that pedagogy, I suppose, not that I know much, vocal pedagogy or like the physicality of, good vocal technique or singing technique, but being able to connect, the very human aspect of singing into saxophone playing as well has really helped my own playing, but also with my students too.
That's um, you know, the solfege aspect of everything, the ear training. That's what I
Hmm.
was trying to sort of collect my thoughts there. I think um, that's been one of the most influential academic skills on my own playing, classical,
Hmm.
jazz, or otherwise. Like, I think solfege, and for somebody like me with, uh, one might say very relative pitch, not perfect pitch. And I only say very relative in that, if you played a certain note, you know, on the piano, my likelihood of guessing it is very slim. Um, so, but once I have sort of calibrated, right, once you play an A, that's an A. Okay, we're good. Um, but the my you know my favorite course, theory related course, was aural skills. Um, I found that I was much faster at sight singing, um, at outlining chords, singing scales, trying to sing very precisely in tune
Hmm.
relative to what scale you're singing. Um, I would even sometimes sing with drones to really make sure that I was like
Yeah.
nailing the pitch, which in turn
Hmm.
helped my saxophone playing.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but I think not only have I been able to sort of use that to my advantage in my own playing, I think it makes teaching easier. I think reflecting on this past year, um, you know, sometimes I try not to play in lessons because I will sort of get carried away and feel like I play for too long. Um, but, I think I wish overall that I had played in more lessons. But that being said, even when I don't play the saxophone in a lesson, I will
Hmm.
still go over to the piano or um, sing something in solfege or just the pitches. Or,
Hmm.
one thing that I've had to work on with some high school students is just singing rhythm.
Yes.
And I think sometimes
Yes.
that's I think a lot of times actually that's the thing that's really that is messing people up is the rhythm,
Hmm.
rather than which button to push. It's when
Yeah.
to push that particular button, because it's like
Yes.
the notes we only have 12 options, but the rhythms, well, you know um but yeah. So one question that I always ask
Hmm.
is, how do you balance encouragement and criticism while helping a student reach their full potential as an artist?
Mm. This goes back a little bit to how I appreciate the one-on-one aspect of the specific mode of teaching. My undergrad professor, John Mickle, would always say he had so many little tidbits of wise words or, pieces of information. And he would always say that music is about the people. like the people that you get to work with, the people you meet along the way, the people that you get to make music with. Um, and I'd always be like, yeah, sure. Like, yeah, obviously, like the people are great. I mean, there's so many wonderful friends that I've made in my life through music and because of music. Um, and as I get older, his little tidbits of wisdom never cease to amaze me how spot on they are. Um, but with with that, getting to know my students and getting to work with them every week, getting to know what they want to get better at, what they want to excel at, what they want out of me, what they want out of their degree. That definitely helps me calibrate what um, what to kind of harp on, what to dig in on, um, maybe what to let go on for 1 week, but then if it's still not better, bring it up the next week. Um, but what I really try to do in both, the larger class teaching, whether it's, music theory, music technology, larger chamber ensemble, like with saxophone ensemble or quartet, um, I always try to create a safe yet critical learning environment. And that was something that I picked up from Betsy Marvin, who's a terrific music theory professor, now retired from Eastman. I was able to do a music theory pedagogy course with her during my time there. It was actually the spring semester that COVID closed everything down. So that was very, very interesting to be in a pedagogy class as everything shifted from in person to online, both as a student and as a graduate assistant. But it is a fine line, and it definitely depends on the student. If I feel like they're in a place where they're willing to get a little bit more of that hard love, then I will dig into it a little bit more. Um, there are varying ways that you can be direct about something. And one thing that I'll do sometimes too is that I will ask the student after they, maybe they run through a movement of something, and I'll ask them, how did you think that went? And that's also an opportunity for me to get into their head, understand how they view their playing, their inner dialogue with themselves, which is also a very important aspect that I can try to influence if I feel like it might be overly negative. That's definitely an important thing to talk about as a teacher. Um, but usually they will say pretty much what I am after. And that's really nice to, as a teacher, to see that, they can problem solve too. Going back to, only being with them for an hour a week. When I asked them how they thought it went, what they thought went well, I asked that first. And then what could be better, I asked that second, specifically in that order. But it helps me, see what their ears hear, what they pick up, what they want to get better at. And then from there, we can go at it as a team. And, when we do diverge on ideas, um, we'll talk it through. And I would say, 95% of the time we'll go the direction that I want to, or, how I hear it or how I view it. But again, it's an open conversation with each student to, again, going back to the how or why of, okay, if you don't want to do it this way, why don't you want to do it that way? So I can flip it back on them too. Um, so yeah, music is always a balance. I feel like this career, more than most others, is just all about balance, whether it's work-life balance or how you talk to yourself in the practice room, how much you grill yourself versus, respect the process. Um, It's, yeah, it's always walking that tightrope as a student, as a performer, and as a teacher.
That's a very good point, and I'm glad you brought up not only the criticism, encouragement, and criticism within teaching, but also, you know, self encouragement and self criticism, which I
Hmm.
think with um, uh, musical, artistic, intelligent people, often self criticism is much more prominent than the other way
Hmm.
around.
Yeah.
And it's like you said, you're right. It is a constant tightrope, you know, of fighting off. Well, not entirely fighting off, but of mitigating, you know, practice guilt and imposter syndrome and those things that we talk about all the time. That, you
Hmm.
know, in some ways are aids to our progress, and in some ways are very quick ways to burn otherwise talented musicians out. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, I'm glad that I don't know that anyone on the show so far has framed it that way.
Oh.
I do like that. That is it's a very good point. You know, it's not just um, an external treatment of encouragement and criticism. It's also an internal, you know, um, process, I guess you could say.
Hmm. Yeah, and also saw something just the other day. I forget where, but it was some study of kind of like mentors working with students or mentees and how they framed feedback or criticism and how it affected the outcome.
Right.
And it was really fascinating because the what was found was that the students that received praise achieved higher than the students that received majority criticism. Um, and it kind of goes into, the self-efficacy and the view of self as, from the student's perspective of feeling encouraged and getting that from someone that is important to them,
Mm-hmm.
whether it be, a teacher or a mentor or someone that is senior to them. Um, and this again, it goes back to Professor Nickel from my undergrad. I can't remember his quote exactly, but it was something along the lines of um, like students are craving praise. And, so often, again, why I ask students what they liked before what they want to work on is because in this art form, it's always what can I do better? What didn't I like? Um, and I have a personal motto that I've tried to instill into my students, which is always proud but never satisfied. Um, and it's kind of holding two truths at the same time that some may feel are conflicting. Um, but always being proud of the work that you've put in, the effort that went into it, being able to get out there and be so vulnerable with people, sharing a part of yourself, while also understanding that it was just one pit stop along a journey. This one performance is just one thing that, is a very meaningful thing, and every performance is important. But it's every performance is also a stepping stone. So even if you weren't happy with it, which, there's always things that don't go as we wanted in a performance. So being able to accept that as just part of the process, while also, respecting how far you've come and how far you have yet to go. And that's, I think that's one of the best things about music is that there is always something, again, going back to process, that you can continue working on, continue getting better at. Um, and, it kind of ties into being a lifelong learner and having that kind of an open mindset as far as, tackling new challenges and learning new things.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to ask, what are some things that you like to do outside of music?
Um, that is one of my favorite things about living where I do. Um, grad school in a way is not real life. It like a last, you know, beyond this previous year when I've been here at Utah, but the 5 years before that, grad school is just such a stressful time. Um, and there were so many beautiful and joyous things that happened in those years of my life. And, you know, not saying that I would want to take that back at all. But grad school is just not real. Um, yeah, the demands are just so high. And there were so many days where I would just be gone for like 12 or 13 hours, sometimes multiple days a week. And then sometimes I would get back to my apartment after those days, and then I would need to grade too. Um, so what I've really enjoyed this year, and it has also been due to my lighter teaching load since I was just in a visiting position this year, being able to, in a way, get a little bit of my identity back, just in the ways that I have free time, that I'm, no longer a student. I mean, well, a student for life, but officially not a student. Um, but being able to find things that brought my life meaning that were outside of saxophone. Um, because it's just, it can be such a grind. And, it's a wonderful grind, and I'm here because I love it. But it is a grind nonetheless. And it's been so nice to, be able to hike, to adventure in a new place. There's so many national parks and state parks and beautiful places to experience the world and just get away. Um, you know, be with myself and the world is such a treat that honestly makes me wonder if I will ever want to leave here, just because there's so much of that opportunity, um, in the Salt Lake area, throughout Utah, and the American West and Mountain West. There's so many things to do outside to just reconnect with myself that are wonderful things. Um, and just, yeah, becoming more active, finding finding things that make me happy outside of music and saxophone. Because while that is a huge part of my identity, being able to respect and find space for other things that also bring my joy, or excuse me, bring my life a lot of joy and meaning, um, I think will only make me a better teacher and saxophonist and person as well.
Agreed. Yes. Thank you for listening. This concludes episode 19 of The Well-Rounded Saxophonist, featuring special guest Jeffrey Allardyce, professor of saxophone at the University of Utah. The music you heard in this episode was composed by Dorothy Chang, performed by Zachary Costello, alto saxophone, and Guillaume Ra, piano. Thank you for listening, and remember to practice smart and stay healthy.